sheep, the wolf, and the sheepdog. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me over the years and said, I always thought there was something wrong with me. All my life, people told me I was a wolf. I'm not a wolf. I would never harm the flock. But I yearn for a righteous battle. I yearn for an opportunity to use my skills. The sheep are all those kind, decent, gentle creatures who can only hurt you by accident or extreme provocation. And the wolf will feed the sheep without mercy. And then there's the sheepdog. And the sheepdog is a predator too. The sheepdog's a meat eater too. It takes a predator to hunt a predator. But that sheepdog, if you have no propensity for violence, then you're a non-violent citizen. If you have a propensity for violence and an absence of empathy, violence without any emotion for others is a pretty good definition of aggressive sociopath or a wolf. But what if you had a propensity for violence and a love for the lambs? What if you spent a lifetime nurturing the capacity for violence and a desire to use it in a righteous battle?
On January 27, 2018, Cry Havoc began developing Babel, a documentary-style play about gun violence in America. In this 6-month process, we interviewed people locally in Dallas. We traveled to Newtown, Connecticut, as well as Washington, D.C. We even attended the National Rifle Association's annual meeting. This was our first interview. Amanda Johnson, the Texas lead for the Survivor Network of Moms Demand Action. So the first thing I want to do is give you guys some statistics because they're pretty shocking. Americans are 25 times more likely to be shot and killed with a gun than people in other developed countries. 93 people are killed on an average day, and that number just went up to 96. Black men are 14 times more likely than white men to be shot and killed with a gun. 62% of firearm-related deaths in all of the U.S. are suicides. 7 children are killed on an average day in the U.S. And on average, there are 12,000 gun homicides a year, and the majority of those are domestic violence. For every 1 person killed with a gun, 2 more are injured. Now, I don't know if anybody's done the digging on what gun injuries cost us as a country, but that's billions and billions of dollars. Now, this is interesting. What you see here is that young people are now being killed more, people under 26, are now being killed more often by guns than they are by cars. And people always want to compare gun deaths to car deaths with people getting car wrecks, but we don't outlaw cars. Well, yeah. Now guns are killing more people than cars, and we regulate cars a lot. 70% of unintentional shootings could have been prevented if that firearm had been stored, locked, and unloaded. And this is heartbreaking. The presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the chance of the woman being shot and killed by 5 times. So that's interesting, because there's people that say, well, if a woman's in a violent situation, let's get her a gun to protect herself. But the numbers do not bear out on that. They say that the gun will be used against her, and she will be killed. Mass shootings, obviously a hot topic right now. What we know is that 42% of the time, that person exhibited some warning signs, and 1 in 4 deaths in a mass shooting is a child. But none of these numbers are correct anymore, because who can keep up, right? But this was the stat I was going for. So in 54% of cases, it's a domestic violence issue. So like Sutherland Springs, that was a domestic violence issue. So we see the connection between mass shooting and domestic violence is very strong, and that's the FBI's definition. 4 or more victims. 10% of those mass shootings take place in a gun-free zone. So that's an NRA talking point. You know, that's why we have all of these school shootings, because we make people, quote, sitting ducks because it's a gun-free zone, and 34% of the time that person was prohibited from possessing a firearm. So what that means is that had it been more difficult for that person to buy a gun off the street, that crime might have been blocked. Background checks that were implemented in 1994 have blocked now over 3 million firearm sales. So that's another NRA talking point. And criminals don't follow laws, so it doesn't matter if we institute laws. But hi, 3 million people had to go and find themselves another way. And did some of those people? Of course they did. But did some of them not? And a crime was prevented? Absolutely. So background checks work. But this is what's really interesting. So there are now 19 states, 7 added since Sandy Hook, that require background checks on all firearm sales. And those states have seen almost a 50% reduction in gun crimes. That's 19 states, and all of this data is straight from the FBI. These are not some liberal numbers, and these are not alternative facts. But what's crazy is the support behind the universal background check is overwhelming, and 98% of Democrats, 90% of Republicans, and even 72% of the NRA, even those guys say, yeah, of course you should go through a background check, but Congress still won't pass it. I mean, we tried again after Sandy Hook. We've just murdered 20 small children and 6 educators, but they still won't pass it. Done. Record time. July 14th, 2018, 7,717 people have died from gunshot wounds in America in 2018. In the last 24 hours, 29 people have died from gunshot wounds. These numbers do not include the estimated 12,000 gun suicides this year so far. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit personal. Carl Lawson, recent graduate and company member.
I think one of the moments that stands out to me the most was like really early on. Like that first rehearsal we had and the first interview we did, and I remember reading that story with Amanda Johnson about her sister killing herself. And I started tearing up. And I didn't expect that to happen. And I'm a person who hates getting emotional, and it was really embarrassing, and I didn't expect that to happen. But it did. In my junior year of high school, one of my friends killed herself using a gun. And at first, we all thought it was a joke. She was known for pranking people and doing crazy things that no one else would. So that Saturday night, I think it was a Saturday, I went home early from a party and laid awake all night telling myself it wasn't true. That she'd pop up Monday morning and we'd all be pissed at her for making some sick joke. I want to make this clear. I wasn't her best friend. And I don't know her family personally, but I knew about her personal life. And she knew about mine. And we would trade lipsticks with each other. And she was there in my life. Until she wasn't.
Sue Longcar, local theater artist, mother of Grace Longcar.
It's just so hard to believe that somebody that was so full of life, I can still picture. When we found her feet, there was something about feet, babies' feet, and they're little, and when she was laying on the floor, I looked at her feet. I tried to pick her up. It was like if I could just pick her up. It was just like if I could just will her back to life. Even though it was obvious she was gone, I tried to sit her up. It was, the image is looking at her feet. It was just the most shocking sight ever, just seeing her laying there on the floor. Mine can't even take it in. And if just a couple people are saved because there wasn't a gun in the house, it's worth it. Maybe everybody won't be, but somebody will be.
We knew Leslie had been struggling with depression ever since she was 13, and she killed herself right after her 21st birthday.
Amanda Johnson.
I had never struggled with depression myself at this point, and I was unable to sympathize or empathize, and I really wanted to tell her to just pull herself back up by her bootstraps, but since then, I have gone through enough depression myself, just enough to have a taste of the hell she lived through, and Leslie's suicide was a little different. Statistically, most suicides happen in a moment of crisis, but hers was not in a moment of crisis. I talked to her that morning. She was not down. She was not depressed. She was pretty good, and this was a decision that she made, and I honestly feel if that gun hadn't been there...
That's the scary thing about it to me, because it was the day that she died. She had been to the mall. She had bought face masks. She was always really proud of her skin, and she just had this porcelain skin, and it was just flawless. And to me, that's not the sign of someone who's getting ready to take their life. So I don't think she was going to take her life. She had a party she was looking forward to going to that Saturday night. But she got in trouble that night. And a lot of research shows that that's what happens a lot of times, that kids in a moment of anger will just react. And that's why I think it's so important not to have a gun in the house. I think she didn't think it through. I think she was just really angry. Because she'd gotten in an argument with her dad that night. I think she just thought, I'll show them. Because her dad had said, you can't threaten suicide to get out of trouble. And I think she just thought, oh, because she was very strong-willed. I think she just thought, I won't just threaten it. I'll do it. I think it was very much an impetuous, spur-of-the-moment decision because teenage brains are not completely developed.
We knew Leslie had been struggling with depression and that there was a gun in the house. It was East Texas. The gun was just the gun my mom had under her mattress because her mom had it under hers. It wasn't a strange thing, and I wonder if we were in another part of the country, if her death wouldn't have happened the way it did. And I was on the road, driving my 1-year-old son and chatting with my mom on the phone, and I could tell I had woken her up, and she said she could see Leslie passed out in the backyard, and then she said she could see a gun, and I told her, don't go out there, you're going to call 911 right now, and the police figured out quickly that it was a suicide. She left a voicemail on her boyfriend's phone, and she had access to other weapons. Guns were a hobby for her. But she took the gun that had once belonged to my grandmother from under my mother's mattress.
We went into her room that next morning, and her bed had not been touched. We stayed up talking to her until about 3 a.m., and then we went to bed. And I think she just... My son looked on the computer, and she didn't know how to load the gun, so she Googled how to load the gun. And so that's why I just feel so strongly that if it hadn't have been there, that she would have cooled down. It was just an impulsive, spontaneous decision that would have passed.
Mental illness, domestic violence, anger issues. We hear those phrases a lot when talking about gun violence.
Are there any behavioral or psychological patterns that can be seen in men that might be prone to violence?
Paige Flint, Executive Director of the Family Place.
Narcissism is a huge issue related to this because they feel like they're the king and everyone else is not. And so, people who don't take responsibility for their own behavior, it's everybody else's fault when something happens. That is a red flag. Domestic violence is about power and control. I want to have power over this person so that I can get whatever I need. And so you have that piece of it. There's also a self-esteem issue related to it. Not feeling good enough about yourself to trust that this person is going to be fair with you and respect to you. And so you have that piece of it as well. Head injuries can actually physically cause someone to have a violent episode. People who have PTSD or are veterans that come back. Their response mechanism is really altered, but it's a learned behavior. There's a split second between an action and how someone reacts. And in that split second, they make a choice. And they choose to use violence.
Mara Richards, Director.
I'm sure you've had to negotiate with people who are crazy. Maybe talk about the difference in talking with a mentally ill person with the gun versus someone who is sane.
Larry Gordon, former SWAT negotiator for the Dallas Police Department.
Talking to people that are suffering from some type of mental illness, if the person is delusional, is very, very difficult because that person do not have a grip on reality. So in negotiations, it's kind of like a seesaw. You guys are young. I don't know if you guys have a seesaw on y'all's playgrounds now. Seesaw in the same way when you're negotiating, if you're very emotional, if the emotionality is high, the rationality is low. If you just think about it, if you ever got upset at your friends, mom, or whoever, and you're so mad at them and you're very emotional, the rationality is going to be down. So what we try to do in negotiations is we try to push that emotionality down, and that rationality automatically goes up. So if a person is delusional, it's very difficult to get that emotionality down because they're not rational. And that's why I say the guy downtown who killed the officers, he was not crazy because he was rational. He was lucid. He was smart. He did it because he was angry. He had a grip on reality. A lot of guys don't have a grip on reality, you know. They're talking about aliens and Osama bin Laden, so that's the difference.
The thing that's frustrating to me with these mass shootings is that they want to go to this man's mental health. That isn't right, because they were, almost every single one of them, if you kind of go down the list, were domestic abusers before they were a mass murderer. It used to be, if he was after you, I could stand right by you and he would shoot you. But there's something that's happened now that's broader than that. I don't understand what that is, but I think that the presence of guns makes it a lot more dangerous for us as bystanders. I don't understand why that is. On February 17th, 3 days after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, we visited a gun range and learned to shoot. David Prince, gun owner, NRA member, and the owner of Eagle Gun Range in Farmers Branch, Texas.
Life is precious. Very precious. I hope you get enraged when a mass killing takes place. I hope it just incenses you. But focus the intensity on somebody besides your law-abiding citizens. We've done nothing wrong. Go after the bad guys. The bad guys have the guns. Registering my gun is not going to stop that gun violence. He's going to get them from across the border. He's going to get them shipped to the East Coast, West Coast. They're going to get guns, and you're going to leave me defenseless. The first mass shooting that I know of was done from the Texas Tower. The Texas University Tower with a bolt-action rifle. 20 people. The next one that was significant in this era was Columbine. Pistols and a shotgun. Next was Sandy Hook. Pistols and a shotgun. Next was Virginia Tech. Pistols. It was only the Aurora Theater in Colorado that, and all this time we were screaming for the AR-15's head when it was never used in a mass shooting. In Aurora, once again, I'm going to bring up a point. All these were gun-free zones. People weren't able to protect themselves. All of them were gun-free.
I just want to correct you. The shooter at Sandy Hook did not just use pistols and a shotgun. Sandy Hook was a Bushmaster X-15, which is the Bushmaster version of the AR-15.
Was it?
Yeah, it was.
There are a whole lot of guns, they're out there. And that doesn't count wherever you stand on it. You can't stop people from coming across our borders illegally. You can't stop drugs from pouring over our borders illegally. How are you going to stop guns from coming across our borders illegally? We are our poorest society, we are our poorest border. Until you stop the bad guys from coming in, what you're doing is turning me into a sheep. And I don't want to be a sheep. I want to be a sheepdog. And we're not going to be wolves, okay? I'll beat my kids to death if they ever thought about being a wolf. But we aren't going to be sheep. I train them to be sheepdogs. We want to be able to protect what's ours and the people we love. I'm not trying to win a fast dog contest. I'm just trying to give myself a chance. If I feel like my life is threatened or my family is threatened, I will protect my family at all costs, and I'll suffer the consequences later. I will not take another person's life unless they intend to do me harm.
Over spring break, we traveled to Newtown, Connecticut to meet with parents and community members at Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook Elementary School, in which 20 first graders and 6 educators were killed, is the deadliest school shooting at an elementary or high school in U.S. history.
In 600 feet, turn right on Dickerson Drive.
It was hard to hear because they were about to celebrate Christmas.
That sucks to hear what a great kid he was and what he could have done with his life.
Turn right.
Oh shit, that's the firehouse.
Arrive at Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Look, there's kids. Oh my god. Kids.
Proceed to the route. Proceed to the route. Arrive. Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Mary Banyan, company member.
All of us were at a river about 2 or 3 blocks away from the school, and after about 15 minutes, we started to see buses with Sandy Hook School District written on them. A couple buses go by, and you get a lot of looks because this is a very close-knit community. They can tell when you're not from there, but then this kid in a green jacket takes the time to wave at us. It was probably one of the highs from the trip.
Mark Barton, father of Daniel Barton, one of the first graders killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School.
I like to tell stories about how compassionate Daniel was. So much so that he would rescue ants from the house. Like big carpenter ants would be in the kitchen and he would think that they should be outside with their families, and so he'd pick them up and they'd bite his fingers. And, why are my little ant friends biting me? And he'd bring them outside and put them in the grass very carefully so they could be with their families. Same thing with worms. He used to pick them up so they wouldn't burn in the sun. He would hold doors for strangers, and all his teachers would tell us that he was very concerned about his peers, and that if anybody was sitting alone, he wanted to sit with them and make sure they were okay. Which prompted people to call him an old soul and the caretaker of all living things. He was a very special, unique little boy in that way. He was, anyway. So you can imagine the lifetime of having to know how he met his end so violently and in such a horrible way. It's going to be a challenge I'll have to figure out how to deal with every single day of my life.
Abby Clements, second grade teacher at Sandy Hook Elementary School.
On December 14th, I came in to school. I was like, well, we have to make snow. We were going to make snowflakes because the PTA legislature was coming up. So it was quiet, and I was getting a little annoyed with them to get quieter. And then I heard the crash, what sounded like a crash. And it sounded like folding chairs falling, like a whole bunch of like that. I heard the custodian say something like shooter in the building.
Nicole Hockley, mother of Dylan Hockley, one of the first graders killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School.
I got the kids on the bus that morning and had a weird experience. I'm not a religious person. I understand the spiritual side, and I believe in that. But as I was driving to kickboxing that day, I remember having this searing pain in my stomach. It made me double over as I was driving. I thought I was going to vomit. But in retrospect, I know that was around the time Dylan was being killed. And so in my mind, that was the moment I felt my son die.
I guess the door was probably a little open anyways. And I realized that those in fact were gunshots. So over here on the wall is the loudspeaker. So it was 154 shots in 5 minutes. And this is all in 5 minutes, it's fast. But I knew, like I was looking up at that, knowing that this is like damaging them. It was like I had this sixth sense that like this was really bad and could like mess them up. And they could hear everything, and it was loud, so it was really bad. I pulled up a chair and I tried to read to them, and they were terrified. Although there were a couple of kids kind of scooching and laughing because they don't know, they don't understand. And then, but then I needed to lock the door because the door locks on the outside. Do you open the door when you hear all that racket out there and that noise? And so I didn't know what to do, and I told the kids that. I was like, I don't know what to do. I gotta lock the door, but I'm scared. And I remember Nicole, one of my little girls, she said, Mrs. Clements, your legs are shaking. I said, I know. I'm scared. I don't know if I should open the door or lock the door. And they were like,
You can do it. Lock the door. You have to lock the door.
And I was crying at that point, and that was the first time that I'd shown that, that I was, And so I freaking opened the door, locked the damn thing, closed it, came back over here, and then we just listened to all those shots. And they were all snuggled in their little coats. And then there's this other part, so I had a cold. And like, what's the one thing the teachers would never do is share food or a water bottle with anybody, like kids. And I was like, well, who has a water bottle? And Ben, he was like, I do. And he hands out this blue water bottle, and I unscrewed the water bottle, and we passed the thing around. And I kind of get the chills about that.
And Tracy, her son's in first grade, and he's also autistic. She called me, and she said, I don't know where you are right now, but keep out of town. The cop cars are just flying through. And so I start class, it's 10 to 11 class, and a few minutes in, the phone, it's just ringing off the hook in the reception area. Because I turned my phone off, but it's Tracy, again. And the instructor, he comes over and he's like, it's your friend, she needs to talk to you. And so I go over and she says that there's a shooting. And it's at our school. And I just collapsed. I mean, I just fell. I don't even know how I got into the car. Paula, my friend Paula put me in her car, and I remember as you got closer and closer, you couldn't move because there were cars everywhere. And I noticed people were running, and so I got out and I started running with everyone else to the firehouse. And it was chaos. Am I telling you the things that you want to hear?
And then, so a lot of people talk about the rescue, and I feel so bad that I'm like upsetting them about this terrible story.
This is why we came here. We've been interviewing.
It's a terrible story.
It is, but it's part of this narrative.
And so then there was some banging on the door, and it was like, police, open the door. Like, I don't know how do you know that's the police, but I opened the door, and the police were literally in the stance, like, get your kids out, like that crazy, like that scary, and I'm not a runner, and so I was running fast, and when I went outside, and when you're like not in shape, and it hurts in the cold air, so I remember that, and I remember seeing my feet running, and then there's this little funny part, so Zachary, so there's always like one kid. And so Zachary is running in front of me, and he looks up at me and he goes, Mrs. Clements, I have to spit. And I said, you spit, Zachary, you spit all you want. Like, what? And then there's like this little girl, and she was like adopted from Russia, and she had like a foot that used to be one of those club foots, but had many, many surgeries, so it was hard for her to walk. And I remember saying, do you want me to carry you? And she said no, and so she was running like that. And then we got to the firehouse, and pure hell, part 3. Because it was just terrible. It was chaos. So thirsty, so many people trying to find my kids, because some went to find siblings and no one was in charge, because we had no one alive. I mean, we had no principal.
The Second Amendment and its interpretation today continue to divide even the most well-intentioned people.
And what is your literal interpretation of the Second Amendment?
That everyone should have guns, that every American citizen should have a gun. I mean, they have a right to. Technically, when you look at it, all gun laws are infringements, but I mean, I guess we can't have everyone rolling around with guns. But yeah, the literal translation, an American citizen, you should have a gun.
Awesome, thank you so much. What is your literal interpretation of the Second Amendment?
That we should own anything it takes to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government, whether it be an outside government or our own. I mean, that's what the Second Amendment's all about. It's not about hunting. It's not about target shooting. It's about being able to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. The British were our government in the 1770s, and we fought them to have these rights and keep these rights, and I think that's what we should do today.
Enjoy the convention.
Dale Carpenter. Chair of Constitutional Law at Southern Methodist University.
The right to keep and bear arms in general is a legacy that our Constitution has had for many years, going back to at least the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The most likely explanation of why it's in our Constitution is that there was a great fear that when the new Constitution created a Congress, that government would have a standing army that could be used to take away the liberties of the people. There's a lot of distrust of the federal government. It's sort of in the DNA of the United States. So the idea was that the states would all have militias. They would all have informal forces where every able-bodied man of a certain age would be part of the militia. They were concerned that the federal government would take guns away from the militia, so they created the amendment. I don't know if any of you have a copy of it, but I can read it. There are really two parts to the Second Amendment, two key parts to the Second Amendment. One is what's called the prefatory clause. It's the very first part of the amendment, and it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And then the second part begins. This is the operative part of the amendment. There's a comma, and it says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that's where the operative part guarantees the right to bear arms. Now the question is, how do we understand these parts together? Are they really two separate parts, or are they intertwined? So the argument for a long time was that the only right that's protected by the amendment was the right of the people to keep their arms and other weapons when serving in a well-regulated militia. That was one argument. In the latter half of the 20th century, especially starting in the 1980s, 1990s, a lot of scholars went back and really dug into the history of the amendment and said, wait a minute, the amendment was not limited in that way. The people, as it's referred to here, is a reference to individuals. Individuals have a right to keep their arms and other weapons, not just when serving in a militia, but even outside when serving in a militia. They have a right to protect themselves, their families, and their property.
Matt Bennett, co-founder of left-leaning think tank Third Way.
Our theory has always been the very first thing you got to say is that in America, you have a right to own a gun. Now, I know you may not believe that the founders intended to confer right to own a gun, particularly a gun like we have now. So, they could never have dreamed that we would have firepower like this in the hands of people. And it is probably true that the founders had no intention of allowing those kinds of weapons of war to be held by individuals. However, there are 300 million guns in circulation. The United States Supreme Court has ruled that the Second Amendment applies to individuals. It's over. That debate is over. So, our advice to people interested in passing more gun safety laws is just acknowledge that in this country there is a right for law-abiding adults to own guns, but no right in the Constitution. Not any of them are absolute.
Sheldrick Pearl, company member.
Walking into the Senate building, I noticed a lot of different offices with different states. It was like America was a continent, and the states were countries. And I was going to the Embassy of Texas.
Fabian Rodriguez, company member.
And we walked into Senator Cornyn's office, and as soon as we stepped in, I wanted to yell, "Yeehaw!" because you knew you were in a Texas senator's office. So there's a Texas-shaped basket on the table, a come and take it flag, and on the floor next to the desk, a fridge with a very Texas soda. Dr. Pepper.
We sat down with Tara McGee.
She's a legislative aide to Senator Cornyn.
She was prepared to write our grievances on a sheet of paper. Then she informed us that we couldn't record. I don't know what was the problem with her phone, but mine recorded just fine.
Do you believe the Fix Mix bill is enough to strengthen background checks?
Right, so what it does is it does impose these penalties on folks if they do not properly inserts information, and so it improves reporting requirements that agencies and local law enforcement have to abide by. So by putting penalties on folks that don't properly insert information, I think that's a good incentive for people to properly upload information, which unfortunately you'd think that people would do anyways, but that's not necessarily the case.
Does that include like private sellers?
Private sellers of what?
Guns?
Guns. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, so that's a good, I think that's at least a good way to start, because until we start fully enforcing our current laws that are on the books, then I think we'll see some positive differences. But until that's done, if you're just adding new laws that cannot be if you're just adding new laws on top of old laws that have not been enforced, then I think there's a big disparity.
But in a mass shooting, sometimes weapons have been sold in a parking lot, and that's how a person has gotten access to a weapon that they never should have had access to.
Right. Well, I mean, that's I don't know how do you really regulate that? Right? Exactly. So that's that in the case. I think that we need to be really, really, in the case of that young man that shot up that school in Parkland, is that where it was?
Yes.
Well, there were a lot of signs. A lot of people reported him to the FBI, local law enforcement, and he fell through the cracks. And that can happen. So that's that mental health aspect that we need to be looking out for, and a sort of a see something, say something deal.
Can you tell us about the Dickey Amendment?
I'm not sure what that is.
Walking into that meeting, I guess you could say I played myself. I thought we were gonna get this crisp, hard-ass, take no shit Republican, and we got this, I don't get paid enough for this aid. Like, talking to her made me think, do these motherfuckers know what they doing?
Back at the hotel in DC, we debriefed the interview. Tara inspired some passionate responses. Jemiah Parker, company member.
She literally didn't even know what the Dickey Amendment was.
She was like, was it like Parkland? Like, bitch, you don't know what it was. Like, there's kids outside. They were literally outside the building. Like, she knew. And I wanted to call her out on it.
No. See, because we prepared for that so well. And then to go into that interview and ask her the questions and she not know?
Senator Cornyn doesn't even know what this hoe looks like. She's a fake job. She's a con. I feel bad for her.
Then let's stop insulting her. She's trying her best.
I saw her write the Dickey Amendment. I saw her do that.
I need to do this for a research project.
The next morning, we attended a coffee with Senator Cornyn.
Seems like we all want the same thing, to reduce gun violence. Why do you think it's taking so long for us to compromise?
It's a wonderful question. On my fixed NICS background bill, Senator Murphy, we have 70 co-sponsors. The president said he will sign it. We're hoping to get them at the end of next week. There's a lot of politics and marketing, a lot of self-promotion, and unfortunately, for the people who are vulnerable, what I found that pays off here in Washington is perseverance. We're going to stay after until it gets done. I told people, I don't want to have to go home and see grieving families knowing we haven't done what we can do.
Responsible not only to run part of the map, it's just great to be with you here in my home state, the state of Texas.
2 months later, we saw Senator John Cornyn again at the National Rifle Association's annual meeting.
It's nice to escape Washington, D.C. for a while, where the facts don't always seem to matter.
Speaking to the NRA membership in Dallas on May 4th.
It's nice to be at home with people like you. People who really understand what it means to live in the land of the free. You know, freedom is never easy. It's hard. We've got to be able to step up and flex a little muscle, especially when it comes to our right to bear arms. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a battle we're in. There are those today trying to shut us up and shut us down. That's why we have to fight to protect the Second Amendment each and every day. The NRA IRC does not give up, and we can't either.
Eric, a gun owner in Dallas.
I used to be a member of the NRA. I think that their line is a little tired. It's all so-and-so's coming for your guns, and there's not really, I don't think that they foster any sort of useful discussion between different viewpoints. I got a lot of emails that were like, Obama's going to repeal the Second Amendment, and I was like, no, he is really seriously not. So I think that they do a lot to create hysteria instead of actually doing anything useful.
There's another example from Sutherland Springs. Some of the media elites and Michael Bloomberg would prefer to ignore. That's right, people who have never picked up a gun or ever been to a community like Sutherland Springs don't want to talk about Stephen Wilfred. Stephen is the hero who stopped the shooter at First Baptist Church. Stephen saved lives that day. By some estimate, there are over 3 million defensive gun uses each year in this country. People use guns to protect their family and their property. We're not going to read that in the mainstream media.
Have you ever been in a position where you felt threatened to where you needed to draw your firearm?
It was a couple of years ago. I had stopped in a part of town that I probably shouldn't have been in, didn't fit in, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I was coming out, and I had like a bag, and I was wearing a jacket, and as I'm walking out, I'm walking straight to my car, which I parked right in the middle of the parking lot, right under the street lamp. And as I'm coming out, I see this guy, and he like pulls up in between me and my car, and I don't really think much of it, because I just got to walk around him. Well, I get in the car, and I see him, he's kind of looking at me through the windshield, and then he climbs over the center console, gets out the passenger side door, and starts walking straight towards me really fast, and I was like, oh man, this does not look good. So I kind of like switched my bag over, unzipped my jacket, lifted up my shirt a little bit, and he was like, oh, never mind, it's cool, man, and walked away.
I'm glad that Stephen was trained by the NRA as a firearms instructor. If it wasn't for Stephen and his AR-15, more lives have been lost that day. Of course, you're not going to read that in the New York Times. Here's the simple fact. Guns can save lives. And good guys and gals with guns can and do stop bad guys with guns. Spread that support for the Second Amendment and support for public safety are one and the same. Never back down from the fight. Refuse to be silenced.
USA! USA! USA!
Jordan Mercado, company member and recent graduate.
My stepdad has had a lot of experience with gun violence. He's been raised in areas where there's been gun violence and he's felt like he's needed his gun. He's used a gun and he's been shot at, so there have been multiple incidents. One of the stories he told me, he was coming back from somewhere and he was getting jumped. Yeah, he was getting jumped and he needed his gun to protect himself. And if he didn't have his gun, he wouldn't be able to protect himself because of laws that had been set, like felonies.
David Jeremiah, local actor and convicted felon.
Can I talk how I normally talk?
Yes.
I mean, I've always been getting in trouble, but like, I caught my first charge, my first real charge was not 18. I was smart enough to rob the 7-Eleven, by the grace of whoever I got put on 10 years probation. But me catching that first charge was like, fuck it. You know what I'm saying? What have I always wanted to do? What have I always had a passion for? And it was movies. So that's how I started acting. And I mean, I made a lot of headway, man. Like, I was good. And when I turned 25, I don't know. I guess I just started reverting back to, you know, going to the hood slowly but surely. Messing with the wrong niggas and just, man, I caught another pistol case, man. And my probation was like, fuck you. So, they violated me for real. And that whole time I was on the run. I did Top Dog, Underdog in Fort Worth. And they nominated me for Best Actor in Dallas by D Magazine. That whole time I was on the run. So laws could have busted in and locked my ass up right there on stage. But anyways, fast story skinny, so fast forward back to the present. I did damn near 4 years on that bitch. And I've been on parole for a year and some months. And I discharged May 28th. I'm 33 years old now. And this will be the first time since I was 18 that the state of Texas has not been on my back.
Detective Larry Gordon, former SWAT officer and negotiator.
We don't really like guns, in an African American household. We just don't. Dad may have one, mom may have one, and so we're not scared of the gun. It's just, we're just not a gun culture. We're just not. And more my white friends and my Hispanic friends, and they're more gun lovers than we were. Even though we have a lot of guns, we don't use guns. We don't see it a lot. You know what I mean? So maybe the guy you were talking to, maybe with that certain culture, certain people that he dealt with that had a gun culture. But for the most part in the hood, it's really not a gun culture. We're just not.
So if I were to go over to a cliff right now and wanted to buy a gun, how much do you think it would go for?
Oh, bro, you can get a bullshit ass hyper. Well, at least back when I was fucking around, you get a bullshit ass hyper for 80 or 100, and that's just a throwaway.
Even with the bullets?
Yeah, I give you some bullets. I throw you some extra bullets in there, bro. Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, kind of what it felt like to aim a gun at someone?
What it felt like? I mean, did I feel bad? Did I feel like, man, I'm fucking up this whole nother human being?
So what was going through your mind in the moment?
Shit. Do what I want. Do what I say. Give me what I want. Do what I say. Like, respect what's going on. You're at a disadvantage. Just do what I mean. Like, everybody has their standards, and there's certain shit I wouldn't do if somebody had a gun in my face. I'd be like, well, you just gonna have to kill me. But there's certain shit I would do if somebody had a gun in my face. Give me your phone. All right, you got that. Give me your, this and that. All right, you got that. Strip, get naked. Bro, you serious? Yeah, strip, nigga. All right, you got that. But I mean, there's certain shit I wouldn't do. Like, you're not finna hurt none of mine. You know what I'm saying? That's where you just gonna have to kill me.
I think the issue is that a law-abiding person can sell a gun on the street. If I'm a law-abiding person and I'm living in Oak Cliff, all right, and I meet Pookie. Pookie wants a gun. I can sell Pookie my gun legally. And Pookie could be the worst individual you ever want to meet, but legally, person to person, seller to seller, I can sell Pookie my gun. And that's legal. The gun rights people argument is, oh, if the bad person want a gun, they'll get a gun. Yeah, you're right. You're right. But stop the good people from selling Pookie the gun. I mean, if I know that if I sold Pookie this gun and I'm going to go to jail for it, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I really wouldn't do it.
Deandra Yates. 2014, my son DeAndre went to a birthday party. February 1st, actually, so we came up on the 4-year anniversary not too long ago. And that night I said, Dre, I don't think I'm gonna let you go to this party. I just didn't feel right. And I was like, I said, there's just so much violence going on. And I really didn't know the people. And he was like, Mom, please let me go. And I was like, okay, but listen, keep your hands to yourself. And if any girls try to dance with you, don't touch them inappropriately. He loved girls, so I just had to throw that out there. And so he comes and he gives me a hug, and he's like,
I love you. And that's the last time I heard his voice. And that's the last time he's ever been able to embrace me, because now he can't lift up his arms or squeeze or anything like that. So I went on about my business and listen, when these things happen, you remember all kinds of numbers and smells. So at 11:37, I felt this explosion in my stomach, and I was like, ooh, I just don't feel right. And then at 11:43, I got the worst phone call mother could ever get. Deandra, get to the hospital. Dre's been shot. Well, what the chaperones told me is that the boy whose birthday it was, he had a friend and his sister was there, and then some guy started messing with his sister, and they got into a fight. And the mom, she told him that he had to leave. And she told me she was having a hard time getting him out, but she told me that she picked him up and set him outside of her door. But the boy told me that when he was fighting with the other guy that he felt a gun in his pocket. And after that, maybe about 2 minutes later, they came back shooting. Shot the house up 22 times. And I say allegedly because we don't know exactly who did it. I went crazy. I went temporarily insane. By the time we got to the hospital, everybody was there. And then I see this sheriff who says the second worst words a mother would ever want to hear. Your son is in here. Please come and identify the body. And I said, what? Identify the body? And I fell to the ground, and I remember as I was on the ground, my mom, she came and she said, I'll do it, don't let her go in there. And so she goes in and she identifies his body, which lets me know he must have coded. And so she comes back and she says, that's him, those were his feet, that's his feet. And I get up and I turn, and it's like a scene from ER. They was rushing him down this hallway into surgery, and then he went into surgery, and then I didn't see him again until maybe about 5 o'clock that morning. He was in surgery for 4 hours, and the doctor, she came and she said, he's made it through surgery, but he'll more than likely die from lung complications, then the gunshot wound to the head. He aspirated at the scene, which means he bled and choked and had to be intubated at the scene, which means he had a trach. He had a hole cut into his neck at the scene. I imagine that Dre lost a lot of blood, a lot of oxygen to his brain. He had 8 strokes, which is why he's so debilitated now. So he was on life support for 7 days, and they asked me to pull the plug and die. And I never did give them an answer. I think they just knew by my facial expression that that's not what I wanted. And so they began feeding him through a tube in his nose, and he actually woke up. He opened his eyes and began breathing on his own, and he's now a nonverbal, what they call a spastic quadriplegic, because he does have some movement. It's just not on command, but he does not talk. He makes a lot of sounds and noises, but no words, no sentences. Every young man and woman shot was not gangbanging. My son was on his way to being something great. I think a lot of it is a mental health thing. If I don't feel like anything, if I don't feel love, then I'm not going to go out into the world and show love. And I always say that young man who shot my son, I don't think he was loved. I don't. to be lacking love somewhere to shoot up a home full of children. The people who pick up guns and go into schools and kill children, they don't have any hope. So I think we need to get back to the basic message of spreading love.
Angela Stroud, PhD, professor of sociology. Her research focuses on whiteness and masculinity.
Toxic masculinity. Even though, and we'll talk about it, I'll get to the point of like masculinity does have toxic aspects, but I would be careful about using that concept too much because other guys who could be just as problematic could be like, oh, I'm not toxic, that's toxic masculinity, I'm the good one. So when I looked at the data in Texas, approximately 35% of the population is white men. In 2008, 80% of license holders were white men. So that's like something we call disproportionality. That's something that has to be explained why white men, who we know by looking at the research are least likely to be victims of crime, are most likely to want to be armed to defend themselves from crime. That's something that needs to be explained. So that's what I did. And what I found by focusing on gender, race, and class in my analysis, I found that particularly for the men, a common theme that stuck out the most was becoming a father made them feel like they had something to protect. And getting married too was an important moment because, well, the way they explained it was like, now it's not just me. Now I'm responsible for being the defender. I need to protect my wife, I need to protect my kids, and that's what it means to be a man. The focus on to be masculine is to be not vulnerable. Like masculinity does not go with vulnerability. We actually define masculinity in this culture as being invulnerable. And we know that in part because we describe femininity as naturally vulnerable. You know, we have this idea that women are always vulnerable. Like the idea that you could be a victim, that would turn you into a woman, basically. That would make you feminine. It's like you would lose all your masculinity if you were to be victimized. And so if you imagine that keeping a gun will keep you from being a victim, it's like super manly to be able to do that. Plus, it's a gun we already think is masculine. Like, we've already defined it as masculine. So it's like a 2-for-1. You get to carry a masculine object and you get to resist, at least in your mind, from being a victim.
Allison Hibbs.
So we brought you here today because of something you said back in Shots Fired, and that when the Second Amendment was written, it wasn't meant for black people.
Mark Hughes, the bystander, falsely identified as the shooter in the July 7th Dallas police shootings.
Just to give you an example, there's been a lot of people that have tested the theory of open carry on the internet. And when you're open carrying and you're Caucasian, it's more of a conversation that's happening. When you're open carrying and you're a person of color, it's more of a, now you're a threat. And the police officers approach you as if you're a threat. So that's what I mean by when I say it wasn't meant for us. After July 7th, I open carried again, and it was one of the most scariest events I ever encountered. I live in Arlington, and in Arlington, Texas, you will see probably once a month, there's a group of Caucasians, maybe 16, 17 of them at a time, walk up and down one of the busiest streets in Arlington. And they're never stopped by the police.
When I talk about whiteness, one of the things I focus on the most is whiteness allows us to be delusional about the reality, to lie about the reality and what this all means. Like, we live in a racist country. It's dangerous for people of color. Black men are being killed, and yet, how is a good guy with a gun supposed to solve that problem? So it's like good guys. Good guys with guns are the ones who are killing black men.
It's something normal when people see the Caucasian race do it. And you know, we were in a neighborhood, and when people see long arms, they can be kind of weary of what's going on.
For me, it's about the stories we tell. We have got, especially white people, a huge responsibility to really interrogate our ideas about crime because they're almost always wrong. They're deeply racist, and there are many consequences that come with this idea that the world is a huge and scary place, and the only thing that can save you is if you are armed.
The police were called out. parked his car, got out beside us. I could tell he was kind of nervous. And then we hear the sirens, and there's like 7, 8, 9 police officers. And the one that walked past us was one of the most aggressive ones at the time. And we hear him, put your hands up, put your weapons down. And when I turn around, I have AR-15s pointed at our heads.
My whole argument is that the good guy is part of the problem. The way we think about good guys, here's why. Every good guy needs a bad guy. So good guys create ideas about bad guys because they need a bad guy to define themselves as a good guy.
They approached us, made us put our weapons down, took our weapons from us, said they needed to see if they were stolen. Now, unless you're committing a crime, that's the only time they have the right to see if it's stolen or if it's yours. But these are some of the things that if you're black or a person of color and you choose to express your Second Amendment right, these are some of the things that you have to go through. But the Caucasian race, 9 times out of 10, doesn't have to go through. And I will say this, law enforcement will give you commands that can end your life.
Put your hands where I can see it.
Get down! Step back!
You know, gun violence, you have to be violence, period. I believe in violence. I believe in righteous violence. Violence, period, bro. That's, if there's one thing you have to be open to, it's to violence. You can't just close violence off. You can't just categorize it as one thing, because that's how anything is fucking made. When you fucking sow a crop, you have to fucking destroy the topsoil of the land. It's violent. You just have to be open and try and understand as much of it as you can.
So the parts of masculinity that are toxic are the focus on domination. Like, I can't ever show weakness. I can't ever be emotional except anger. Anger is the only emotion that's allowed with masculinity. I can't be sensitive. I can't let you win. Or even admit that everybody loses sometimes. It's like we have this idea that to be masculine, you have to win all the time. And the minute you lose, you're weak.
Okay, so to buy a firearm in this country from a licensed firearm dealer, you have to submit to a background check, where they look through your records and they make sure you're not a convicted felon or have any other history of violence or violent behavior or not a terrorist or whatever. However, that same procedure does not have to happen in certain sales legally. So if, at certain tables at a gun show, you can buy a firearm without even giving your name, and that's legal. You can make an arrangement off of somebody on arms list, which is like Craigslist for guns, and buy an AR-15 out of the trunk of somebody's car with only cash in hand and not even give your name, and that's legal. So that's what's called a loophole in the background check system.
And so a lot of what we've been talking about is universal background checks, and how do you feel about those?
I don't know what kind of. I worry that it will punish people that aren't doing anything wrong. I think that the role of law is generally you don't do this or I'll punish you for it. So if the one thing that you're punishing somebody for doesn't really have a strong negative harm. So if you want to have a law about universal background checks and essentially it's don't sell to someone outside of a dealer and someone does it anyway, then what kind of punishment are you willing to put on them, Especially if it's they sold a deer rifle to their buddy. I think you could create some powerful negative externalities with that.
Michael Corcoran, film and theater actor and tactical trainer for firearms.
I've sold a couple guns before, and if I'm selling something, a gun to a friend, there's no paperwork I have to go through. I can give you a gun, and you can pay me for it, or I can just give it to you. There's nothing that needs to happen after that, and that's the problem. It's the gun show loophole, and I say I'm in favor of a registry because I feel like for something that important, for something that vital to know where it is and who's got it, because if you misuse it or kill somebody with it and they're like, I don't want the gun registry to find me, and I'm like, I think if you can find me by my driver's license, then they have your freaking driver's license and passport. What's the difference with a firearms license? Oh, what? You don't want the government to track you? Well, then you're gonna have to get rid of every other thing the government uses to track you.
So, what about a centralized, computerized database of gun licenses, gun ownership, gun purchases?
I just know really why. For what purpose? What purpose would that serve if I, as a legal gun owner, am put into a database? How is that going to help at all?
If your gun is stolen.
It's reported to the police with a serial number, is how it's supposed to go.
All of the paperwork on people who have guns, it's all on paper and files. And you know, that instance in Houston when all that got flooded, it just seems like it would be a lot easier if it were put into a computer.
I'll tell you what the theory is. If you have a national database and a totalitarian government steps up and wants to disarm the citizens, you've just given them a roadmap on how to disarm the citizens. You've just told them what they are, where they are, how many of them there are, and they'll take it away.
You can't take your guns away.
Yes, they can.
That's not what a national registry is doing. You
No,
just register your gun in there. I'm just saying if we had all the guns ever purchased in a database,
Okay.
not taking steps on what kind of gun you can have. If it could decrease violent crime, you should take a chance with that, right?
Yes, you should. Have more police and you can reduce violent crime immediately.
Well, when a person purchases a gun and it's stolen, maybe if they reported it, you could track.
You can track what? All you can track is that they got it stolen. You can't track where it goes because the illegal guy, the thief, isn't going to register with the database.
So should there be penalties for somebody who doesn't secure their weapon and it's stolen?
I'm going to have to say no. For someone just coming into my house and violating my sanctity to get a gun and take it someplace, no. There shouldn't be any penalty.
But if they didn't report it...
If they didn't report it, okay.
Yeah. If your gun gets stolen, isn't it your responsibility to tell the police?
It's my responsibility, but it's not my requirement. I take it seriously and I report it. I've had 2 stolen. I took it seriously and I reported it. But that doesn't stop all the other legal guns on the street. People have illegal guns. The thing I think is horrible is somebody committing a crime with a gun and not being properly punished. To me, it was lack of law enforcement, lack of judicial punishment for those people doing things legally. And instead of focusing on those, you focus on people who are law-abiding. Make us register our guns, make us forfeit our guns, make us limit our guns, and we've done nothing wrong. I mean, what has your common citizen done wrong to deserve any of this government intervention in their lives?
We are just getting new video from inside the school as that deadly shooting was underway. It was reported by a student. That scene there played out in an American high school classroom today. Those are teenagers on the floor under their chairs and desks, screaming as gunshots were fired.
Trusted world, they, yeah, oh, they're not
trauma surgeon at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas.
Sure. So this is one of the most critical things that is sanitized to the public after these shootings occur. We're trying to repair this damage that's been done. When you think about the path of a bullet, when it enters, it leaves the gun with such velocity. And I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to bring some physics out for you guys, okay? It leaves the gun with such velocity. And that energy, it has to go somewhere. So there's this path that it takes through. And that energy is going circumferentially around the projectile. It creates a cavitary or a cylinder of space around the projectile. And so as it's going through you, it's moving tissue out of the way around it. And so the faster it moves, the more tissue it damages, the more damage it can cause. So if you think, anybody skip rocks across the pond? All right. You take something like a brick. You walk up to the edge, you drop it into the water. You see a little splash, little ripple effects go out a certain distance. Now you take that same brick, you put it over your head, and then you slam it into the water. You'll see bigger splashes, bigger ripple effects go out even further. That's comparing a handgun to an AR-15. The handgun is just dropping it in, but the AR-15 is slamming it in. They'll both do damage, but the AR-15 does a lot more damage. And if it hits bones, I mean some are completely shattered, and I mean pulverized. And if it hits something like an organ, like the liver, I mean that is just irreparable. You can bleed out from these injuries before you get to the hospital. That's why so many die out in the field from internal hemorrhage. People don't see that. Another thing that people don't see is when a bullet enters the body, it can leave a hole maybe the size of your finger, if not smaller. Now you turn that patient on the back, and that injury is a much bigger hole because that's how much more damage is being done. People don't see that. That's what they don't report in the news. That's what they don't show you in these movies. These weapons were meant to kill people. Okay, they were meant to kill. You don't have to be very skilled to kill with them. You don't have to be able to aim very well. You just need to be able to point out into a crowd of people, and you can take out a lot of people.
So we usually talk about the impact of guns on fully grown and mature adults, but when you talk about children, what impact would a handgun have on a child as opposed to an adult person? Would it be like a military grade on an adult?
So the question you're asking is if an adult is shot with a military grade, is that the same as a child who is shot with a handgun?
Yes.
Okay, so the answer to your question is the tricky thing about children is that everything is compact, so everything is closer together. And so a bullet traveling through a certain trajectory can do a lot more damage in a smaller space than in an adult. See, I've had patients who are shot in the chest, but it goes through the lung. They can live. But a child, that same bullet can nick their heart. Does that make sense? Obviously, when everything's kind of packed in there together, it's easier to buy the blood vessels and buy the organs. It's the size of the child that makes them a harder target to hit. But when you do, so much more damage is being done. And if you think of Sandy Hook, these were kids shot and killed with a military-grade weapon, and that still did not bring people to action. I mean, these were little white kids. When little dead white kids can't bring people to action, I mean, that tells you about the influence of gun advocates in this country. The pro-gun advocates, it's scary.
In order to conduct interviews, Cry Havoc Theater Company had to purchase memberships for each of us. We are all now proud patriots of the NRA.
You go first.
Oh, I'm gonna go first.
You go first.
Oh, okay.
Well, I have never been more aware of being black than I am at this convention. Like, when we were joking about it, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna get like a strange look, but I can deal with the strange look. But people, when I would interview them, they would not look at me. They would turn to the other person I was with and answer the question that I asked them. I was mistaken for the help 15
15 minutes in, like I hadn't even walked in completely, and I just felt like yucky and like I knew I was gonna get looks. Yeah, but I just felt yucky, and I didn't want to come back, but you can't let them win.
So if you could say something to the NRA, what would you say?
I'm black, and I have an NRA membership.
Anything from you, Jemiah?
I'm burning this when this is over.
What this is? Ballpoint pen. I can carry this on an airplane. I cannot carry a firearm on an airplane. I can kill you quicker with this than I can with the firearm. Right now.
Uh-oh, we're going Rambo on them. Don't go Rambo on these kids now.
Can you tell us why you want your firearms?
We hunt. We target shoot. We enjoy recreation with them. And if something horrible happens, we like having the ability to protect ourselves.
And our families.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, and I'm interested in the mechanics, and I'm a historian. I'm interested in the history.
So we went to a gun range and shot a 22, a 9mm, and then a fully automatic AR-15. We were wondering, do you have other kinds of experience with any other firearms?
Did you just use the term fully automatic and AR-15 in the same sentence?
Yeah, we used the what is it, the bump stock.
Oh, the bump stock, yeah. See, there's a congressional definition of what a machine gun is, and the bump stock does not fall under that definition.
But do you know the difference in fully automatic? I mean, I think he lost you.
Well,
but do you know what automatic means?
Could you give us a more clear definition?
If I pull the trigger back, the gun shoots till it's empty.
Yeah.
That's a machine gun. Semi, I gotta pull it each time for it to shoot.
Right. So I misspoke.
Oh, I know. I just want to make sure you understood.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the media all the time says the wrong thing, and if we want a rational debate, it needs to be correct words.
Of course.
And I understand. Yeah. I just want to make sure you understood.
No, for sure.
I would also like to comment, you two are in a demographic that's very important to maintain gun ownership. You're young and you're female. The more youth and females we get involved in understanding the importance of gun ownership, the more likely it is that you're going to see this kind of thing when you're my age. So we just hope that you understand and that you're respectful of the world. Since you asked us, I'm going to ask you, how old are you and where are you from?
I'm Angie, I'm 16, and I go to Booker T.
Oh, yeah. I grew up in Dallas, I know.
What about you?
Same age, same school.
Now let me ask you a question. How did you feel when you first shot a firearm?
The first time I shot a firearm, it was a bit exhilarating. I did feel kind of a bit scared at how much power I felt in my hands at one time, and it did make me feel a bit more than human, but I understood the enjoyment.
A gun is a great equalizer. You're 16 and probably half my weight, maybe. Half my upper body strength, or less. If I was to attack you when you weren't armed, you wouldn't stand much of a chance.
Yeah.
If you had a handgun,
Just.
you'd stand a much better chance.
You know, little old ladies in the house that burglars come in. You know. So, we appreciate your time. It's nice to meet you ladies.
You too.
So, I didn't like that he looked at me, examined my body, then told me what my size was and that he could attack me and I wouldn't stand a chance. That made me very uncomfortable. Also, the whole, they're just waiting for an opportunity to pounce on a misspoken word. Honestly, I was so close to just being like, do you think we're against guns because Jemiah is black? Is that why?
Right. And you know, they didn't ask me my name either. They didn't ask me not once.
The AR-15, the only difference between that and the military version is that the AR-15 is only a semi-automatic. It shoots the same rounds. A 223 or 5.56 are virtually the same round, and the majority of the time, the effective range for an AR-15 for a 223 round is between 250 and 500 yards. So it's called a high velocity round, and that round is designed to kill people.
Now, why do you need the AR-15 as a semi-automatic as opposed to a bolt action? Good question. One, it's sport. Two, when you're in a home, you can have a pistol or you can have a rifle. A semi-automatic allows you to fire a few more rounds. It's not for butchering. Hunters are preservationists. They want it preserved. They don't want to fill it full of holes because they want the rest of the meat. But if that animal gets away, you need another shot. Time you bolt it and come back, the animal's gone. You've now lost your food source.
The AR-15 is a hunting rifle? Pretty terrible. You can do it, yeah. You can shoot varmint with it and that type of thing too, but that with anything else you can shoot with a .22 Magnum or a .22 long. You shoot a high-powered round at a rabbit, you're going to explode the rabbit and at a deer. If you're a surgeon with a rifle, if people say it's for hunting, you just want to have a cool gun, but the second half of it is, I want it for home defense.
If someone is coming into my house, I want to have the ability to fire off as many rounds as I can for protection. I'd rather have a rifle. I can keep pulling the trigger 20, 30 times versus bang, bolt, bang, bolt, bang. If someone is coming into your house, why in the world would you have a single shot? And that's what's happening today. The majority of the bad guys have more firepower. It's like, what do you say, don't bring a knife to a gunfight? If you have a single shot, a revolver, you've just handcuffed yourself and trying to defend your family.
Let's count the ways the AR-15 is the worst thing for home defense. Unlike the movies, bullets go through things. And if I shoot you with an AR-15, most likely if you're not wearing body armor, most likely it's going to go through you. And if you miss because you don't know what you're doing, that bullet's going to go through that wall without breaking a sweat. So it's a danger to everybody else in the house and the houses around you, even if I'm really good at shooting it. Have I trained to practice in the dark? When shit goes down, when it hits the fan, if you're not trained with this thing, as soon as you're under all of that stress, it all goes to hell.
So, Friday morning, December 14th, as I would do, I'd walk each of them to their bus. And James was the first at 6:30, then Natalie at 7:30, and Daniel at 8:30. And I'd wake them up in a successive order to get ready for their buses. So at 6:30 in the morning, it's still dark out, and I'm walking James out the door to his bus, and I hear these little footsteps clamoring behind us, and it's Daniel, and he's running down the driveway in just little short pajamas and flip-flops, 15 degrees out. I'm like, what are you doing up? And he said, can I come with you to the bus? I want to hug James and tell him that I love him. So we walk to the bus, he goes up, wraps his little arms around James and tells him that he loves him. Have a good day, James. We're having pizza tonight. And so Daniel and I get back to the house, and I'm like, you know, it's still dark out. You can go back to bed if you want. And he said, no, Daddy. This gives us time for cuddling, which was pretty typical of Daniel, so we were cuddling on the couch and wrestling, and we stopped. And we had turned on the Christmas tree lights, and he said, look at how beautiful the sunrise is this morning. It's going to be a beautiful day. And he said, you can see the reflection of the Christmas tree lights in the window with the sunrise behind it. I thought, you know what? What 7-year-old kid thinks like this? And I said, you know what, you're right, Daniel, and I'm going to go get the camera and take a picture. So I have this picture of that sunrise that morning. It's a beautiful sunrise. You know, Daniel proclaimed it was going to be a beautiful day. he wanted to walk Natalie to her bus too, so he could kiss her and tell her that he loved her. And so we get back to the house before his bus, and he's like, and he wanted me to teach him how to play the piano. So I taught him how to play Jingle Bells. He did it. He wanted to make sure he held his little hands as the right way. And he did a beautiful, beautiful job playing Jingle Bells. So I walked him to his bus, and he was talking about, pizza night tonight. And I put him on the bus, and they go back to the house, and I'm working on a music project for somebody. And then I started getting phone calls, and texts, and emails.
On December 14, 2012, the parents of students at Sandy Hook Elementary were instructed to wait at the Sandy Hook Firehouse. Nicole Pop.
And if you can imagine a series of rooms all connected with hallways, because these are just back rooms of a firehouse. And imagine, first graders, second graders, third graders, fourth graders, all sitting in different rooms, and teachers, very quiet teachers, and parents just everywhere, like pressed against one another, trying to find, where's my kid? It's horrible. And this woman who, I don't even know who she was, but I know her face and every detail. She turned to me and she said, "Which classroom are you looking for?" "I'm looking for Miss Soto's class." "I heard she's been shot." "Don't say that! Don't say that if you don't know it's true!" That was my first indication that something was really not right. And then they asked us, all the parents, to step to the front rooms from the back rooms where the kids usually are. And I kept staring at each one, trying to find Dylan, trying to see one of his classmates, or trying to find Anne Marie, who I knew would be with him, but I couldn't find him. I did find Jake though, which was awesome, and just feeling his arms wrap around me as he hugged me, and him asking what's going on, and I said, "I don't know," and him saying, "Where's Dylan?" and I said, "I don't know, but I'm gonna find him." And then I had this bizarre moment where this police officer was standing in the middle of the doorway on this chair, and he looks at all of us, and he says, "Do you all want to know what's going on?" And if my memory is correct, a lot of people were yelling, "No!" We wanted to be told an appropriate way.
Abby Clemens.
So I couldn't remember, at first, who was absent. I did have 2 kids absent that day, so I had 17 kids. And I was like, "Look in your clusters. Who's here?" Terrible. But all my kids survived. And then the parents. And you can only imagine what it looked like when they got their kid. So, we had a piece of paper ripped for the parents to sign their names. When they left, it was, I'll just never forget some of their faces. I remember one dad hugging me, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Do you want me to stay?" And I'm like, "Yes." And then there were the whisperings.
And so I took Jake off to the front, and I signed him off to a friend, and I think I saw 4, at that moment, of Dylan's classmates with an adult that I didn't recognize. And so I go to the adult, and I'm like, "Where's the rest of the kids?" And he says, "I don't know, I've just been asked to stand here and wait." And I remember I kept seeing one of the girls who was Dylan's reading partner, and she just stared at me with this blank face. And then they basically said, "If you're still here, you go to the back room."
And then, there was like this room where the parents were slowly, well, there were parents and no kids.
That's when I really started to shut down. At one point, I had this priest come up and sit next to me. He just came up and silently sat next to me, which was absolutely right. But I did have this nun come up to me in front of me and say, he's in a better place now. He's with God. I did say, get her the fuck away from me. Because at this point, I knew nothing. And no matter what your faith is, the place where he belongs is with me. That's when the suits came in. When Governor Malloy, our Connecticut governor, I didn't even know what he looked like. I was never a political person. Came in, and people were demanding, why are we here? Where are our kids? What's going on? And by then I just assumed Dylan had run off. He was hiding in a closet somewhere. Because he started to hear more details about a shooting. And a lot of people were dead. You can't ever put yourself in a place of thinking that could be my kid. So he looks at all of us. And he says these people need to know. He looks at us. He says, if you're still here, then your loved one's not coming back. And the room just erupted. I mean, absolutely erupted. I had this father in front of me who collapsed to the floor and started beating himself. And this mother was just screaming at the top of her lungs. It was horrific. Absolutely horrific. I just wanted to leave.
And that's when we knew our little Daniel was gone. And, so that was over five years ago, and I still can't get used to saying those words. That my little buddy is gone. He should be 12 years old now.
Maya Parker.
Okay. So when they said I would be doing a show about gun violence, I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize people got this upset about it. And I was like, guys, what is really the matter? Like, seriously. And then I did this show, and I was like, oh, that's what's the matter. Everybody's dying, and no one wants to do anything about it. So I am going to go to a point where I'm going to say I do feel hopeless from time to time doing this show because we've spoken to so many different people. And the question that always comes up is, well, what should we do? If we can't do this, this, and this, then what should be done? And everybody has a different answer on that, and one answer contradicts the other. And it just feels like there's no real solution to solve this issue.
There was a bipartisan piece of legislation from a Democrat and a Republican. Senators who drafted this legislation that would close that background check. We thought this would be a good place for us to start some kind of advocacy. We understand this wouldn't have influenced what happened here, but it could have saved lives elsewhere, which was our mission. So we lobbied in the Senate, trying to encourage folks to vote yes for this. I'm a guitar player. I didn't know anything about guns. I didn't know anything about laws or politics or any of it. I just figured, well, that makes sense.
We met with 49 senators in a span of a few weeks. Some of them cried with us. We tried to focus our meetings primarily on Republicans and those who were on the fence. We didn't want to waste our time with people who were already on our sides. The ones who voted no for background checks, in my opinion, they weren't just being politicians. They were saying, this is what I truly believe in, that this could be wrong. And I had some respect for them. But then there were those who cried with us, agreed that this would be good, and that their constituents would agree. But then went on to say that they couldn't vote for this because they had come out against their party on a certain issue. Those are the cowards that I don't have respect for. You know, we never name and shame, and it's a hard line to walk when you just want to yell from the rooftops, but you can't get things done yelling. People like you better when you don't.
And James actually came to one of the meetings with us. It was this wild moment, like this 12-year-old kid just sitting quietly, watching the adults talk. And the senator was telling us, I'm an NRA. I'm A-rated in the NRA. I'm not going to vote for this. And at least he was being honest, because something just lied to our face and said, oh yeah, it's a great idea, and then voted no. But the senator was saying, I can't vote for this. I'm in the pocket of the NRA, basically. And so we were closing up the meeting, we were packing up our notebooks, and we were all kind of discouraged. And then my little son James just, excuse me, Senator. And the room was silent. He said, I'm here on behalf of my little brother Daniel. And he started quoting, he said, in your state there's this. He starts breaking down the different statistics of gun-related deaths and homicides and suicides in the senator's state. He said, don't you think this law might save some of those lives? And the senator just looks to the floor, his eyes well up with tears, and he looks back at James and he said, I think it probably could. And then James said, well, maybe think about that when it's your turn to vote. And we were all just looking at James like, dude, where'd you get those statistics? He's a kid, he's on his phone playing a game. But no, he was looking up statistics for the state, and he said, I looked it up. Anyway, that senator did go on and vote no. Anyway, what happened was we needed more than half the Senate to vote for this. I think we needed 60 votes. We had 54, 56. Still not enough to get 60.
Hello. My name is Mark Barden. Just 4 months ago, my wife Jackie and I lost our son. And our children, James and Natalie, they lost their little brother Daniel. Daniel was a first grader at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Our sweet 7-year-old Daniel is one of 20 children. 6 adults lost on December 14th. I have to say, it feels like it was just yesterday. In our deepest grief, we were supported by the love of our families and comforted by the love and prayers we received from millions of America from every corner of the country. What happened in Newtown can happen anywhere, in any instant. Any dad in America could be in my shoes. No one should feel the pain. No one should feel our pain, or the pain felt by the tens of thousands of people who lost loved ones to senseless gun violence. And that's why we're here. 2 weeks ago, 12 of us from Newtown came to meet with U.S. senators and have a conversation about how to bring common sense solutions to the issues of gun violence. We came with a sense of hope, optimistic that real conversation could begin that would ultimately save the lives of so many Americans. We met with dozens of Democrats and Republicans and shared with them pictures of our children, our spouses, our parents who lost their lives on December 14th. Expanded background checks wouldn't have saved our loved ones, but still we came to support a bipartisan proposal from 2 senators, both with A ratings from the NRA.
A common sense proposal supported by 90% of Americans. It's a proposal that will save lives without interfering with the rights of responsible, law-abiding gun owners. We'll return home now, disappointed, but not defeated. We return home with the determination that change will happen. Maybe not today, but it will happen. It will happen soon. We've always known this would be a long road, and we don't have the luxury of turning back. We will keep moving forward and build public support for common sense solutions in the areas of mental health, school safety, and gun safety. We take strength from the children and loved ones that we lost, and we carry a great faith in the American people. On behalf of the Sandy Hook Promise, I would like to thank President Obama, Vice President Biden, for their leadership and for standing strong and continuing to fight for a safer America. I would like to thank Senators Toomey, Manchin, Schumer, and Kirk for coming together to seek common ground on legislation that would keep guns out of the hands of criminals and save lives. I would like to thank Connecticut's Senators Blumenthal and Murphy. They've been right with us. They stood by us right from the very beginning. From the first few hours after this tragedy, they were with us. We will not be defeated. We are not defeated, and we will not be defeated.
Years ago, I sort of inadvertently got involved with a group called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and we're exponentially the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country. And today's our 5th anniversary. It's our birthday, and we're 70,000 members strong, which is really impressive in 5 years. And we attack gun violence prevention from a lot of different angles. It's political, which I love, and I mean, from my first meeting, I knew I had found my tribe of people, and to be honest, they all drank too much, cussed too much, and were afraid of nothing. It's called moms. But it's men, women, uncles, brothers, lots of LGBTQ, lots of empty nesters, so it's everybody. And Congress is the end game, not the beginning. You know, we took a page out of the Marriage Equalities Movement book. They went state by state until they got just what they wanted, until it was overwhelming, and we're doing the same thing. And working with politicians is huge. And the thing is, now that there are 70,000 of us that won't shut up about this, we're in some cases forcing politicians to talk about this, and in most cases, enabling politicians to talk about this.
Angie Hogue.
So during rehearsal for Sex Ed, the show we did with Mara, we were just rehearsing, and in the middle she goes, "Oh my God," and she was like, 17 kids were shot. And it's like that Stalin quote, the one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. It's hearing 17 kids shot and knowing that your response is supposed to be, well, how horrible. But our brains aren't programmed to process tragedy at the level that we have to at this day and age, so we go through and see more tragic things than our bodies are supposed to be seeing on a daily basis. So throughout this show, just hearing tragic story after tragic story, and knowing how upsetting it was to you, well then you go, imagine how hard it is when that's actually what happened to you.
They haven't already had a moment of silence in the House of Representatives, so I would like to have another one. Thank you. Every single person up here today, all these people should be at home grieving. But instead, we are up here, getting together because if all our government and president can do is send thoughts and prayers, then it's time for victims to be the change that we need to see. Since the time the founding fathers and since they added the Second Amendment to the Constitution, our guns have developed at a rate that leaves me dizzy. The guns have changed and the laws have not. To everybody politician who is taking donations from the NRA. Shame on you. The people in the government who are voted into power are lying to us, and us kids seem to be the only ones who notice and are prepared to call BS. Companies trying to make caricatures of the teenagers nowadays, saying that all we are is self-involved and trend-obsessed, and they hush us into submissions when our message doesn't reach the ears of the nation. We are prepared to call BS. Politicians who sit in their gilded house and Senate seats funded by the NRA telling us nothing could have ever been done to prevent this. We call BS. They say that tougher gun laws do not decrease gun violence. We call BS. They say a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. We call BS. They say guns are just tools like knives and are as dangerous as cars. We call BS. No, they say that no laws could have been able to prevent the hundreds of senseless tragedies that have occurred. We call BS. That us kids don't know what we're talking about, that we're too young to understand how the government works. We call BS. If you agree, register to vote. Contact your congresspeople. Get peace in your mind.
Cara Lawson.
Even if not all of the guns disappeared, like, there's this fable that I heard a lot when I was growing up, and it's about this old man and a young boy taking a walk on a beach one morning. And this morning was the morning after a storm, and the storm had rushed in all of these starfish. And the little boy, he's walking along the coast, and he's throwing starfish back into the sea, and the old man turns to him and he says, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time. There are tens of thousands of starfish out here." So the little boy, he picks up a starfish and he looks at it and he throws it back into the sea. And he says, "I saved that one, and it mattered to that one." Senator Cruz has any thoughts on the student protest movement that's happening?
I haven't talked to him about it. That's a good question.
Sean Cooksey, legislative aide to Senator Ted Cruz.
We just happened to stumble onto the protest outside the Capitol the other day, and I was wondering, what the response is around the halls.
There's a lot that goes on, and, after a while, you just get used to it. So I think, you don't notice. So it's certainly, living in D.C., you get used to it, and it's just, we notice, but it's not unprecedented. Does that make sense?
Downstairs in Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy's office.
So how do your colleagues feel about the movement that's happening?
Some of them love them, some of them are scared to death of it. It just depends on what side of this fight you're on. And there's no great social change movement in this country that hasn't been led by kids. Whether it be the civil rights movement, John Lewis, teenager walking across the bridge in Selma, Alabama. This starts to become a movement if it's led by kids, if it's led by students. And so it sort of depends on what side of these things you're on.
challenge coins, and those mean so much to me. And the common theme when they gave me a challenge coin is they would call me a sheepdog. After a long thought about that, I found out that the police department knows very much what a sheepdog is, because they are the sheepdogs, and I was told that a challenge coin and being a sheepdog is protecting your community, and there's three types of people. There's sheep, there's sheepdogs, and there's wolves. I'll accept being a sheepdog. I took care of my community on that day, and I would do it again, as each one of you have indicated you would. But being a sheepdog, we all need to understand that we can't do it alone. That there's always a shepherd that takes care of the sheepdog. And what the shepherd does is the shepherd makes sure that his sheepdog have food, water, and a warm place to sleep at night and rest. And a shepherd will take care of and brush the thorns and thistles out of the sheepdog's coat. And when too many wolves come down on one sheepdog, he sends other sheepdog to help, or steps in himself to protect his sheepdog. I'm here to tell you today that Jesus Christ is my shepherd. What happened in Sutherland Springs was all him, and it's his glory. And thank you for my God and for his Son that paid the price for us. Thank you to God for protecting this great nation, and thank you for the NRA. Thank you very much. God bless.
On May 7th, we attended the National Rifle Association's annual prayer breakfast.
Let us pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this country where we are free to gather as NRA members and guests in this special place and celebrate God-given rights as free men and women. We acknowledge you as creator and sustainer and the original source of our freedom. We extend our gratitude to you for our freedom. Lord, we put our faith and trust in you, not in our own governments or militaries, our own technologies, or even the strength of our own arms. Still, we humbly ask you to direct and bless those who seek to take away those freedoms. Empower us to protect the peace of our homes. Ensure the safety of those defending the homeland overseas, and deliver us from despots or tyranny. Bless the work of the NRA as they seek to protect those rights that define us. And help us to be people not only of conviction, but also law-abiding people of responsibility and exemplary representatives of your love. Thank you for this body of great people who demonstrate your love for others, who have a heart of service for others. And at a time of testing, help us to equip ourselves as free men and women. And I thank you for the satisfying meal and the company we're about to enjoy. I pray this all in the name of the ultimate authority, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Reverend Dr. Weston Bruder, the senior pastor at Kessler Park United Methodist Church.
I would say that closely allied with the Christian evangelical movement is this belief in inerrancy of Scripture. That's the other problem. This idea that what's in Scripture is the precise Word of God, that God dictated or that God made it, so that what we literally have is from God Himself. And I use the word Himself purposefully. That there are no errors in it. And that if we understood it correctly, it would all cohere. But if you've read the Bible at all, common sense reveals that there's no way, one, that it coheres. It's 66 different books written over 1,000 years. There are known blatant contradictions, errors, things that can't possibly be true. So you think about that, now take that to the NRA. Now first of all, I did find it very interesting. I didn't realize how thoroughly permeated with evangelical Christianity that the NRA was. But it makes sense. Why? Because in the late 60s, early 70s, evangelical Christianity began to take on this persecution complex. So they looked at the world around them that was changing, right? So the sexual revolution. You had communism that threat. You had the rise in divorce. Well, that's kind of tied up in the sexual revolution in a sense. So you had all of these forces changing around you. So the evangelical Christianity began to, what's the right word? they began to panic. I mean, they found a real defensive posture, right? So what you've got is, the evangelical Christian today thinks that this country used to be a bastion of Christian freedom. Christian. Everything was Christian. They look back to 1776 as the glory days, right? You know, it's all steadily gotten worse since then, okay? Especially in the 1960s. And they'll recite to you the litany of horrors. They took prayer out of school, they legalized abortion, oh, what else? I mean, those are the two really big ones, right? So you got that working against you. So this evangelical movement began to pick up steam and began to, incredibly enough, pick up political power with Reagan, who was a lousy Christian in the way he actually lived. But what was he? Well, he was conservative on social values and the economy. And that's which proves to you what the real interest was of evangelical Christians and the ones who saw this potential for collaboration between right-wing politics and evangelical Christianity.
Angela Stroud. So the one thing I would say is, I don't give up on people who are religious, who don't share my views. I just ask them to deal with the moral questions, like, make this a moral question. Statistics don't work for people, I wish they did. As a sociologist, I'm like, look, here's the data, aren't you moved? And they're like, not moved, they don't care. So there's that, and I will say just one anecdote about religion. One of the people I interviewed for my research, I said, I asked him, is there any conflict for you? That, you're Christian and you believe deeply in your beliefs that, you carry a gun and you might someday have to kill someone? And he said, even Jesus said, live by the sword, die by the sword. And I didn't say it, of course, but he did not understand that verse. The verse, live by the sword, die by the sword, is actually, if you live by violence, you will probably die by violence.
I am what you would call a street evangelist, and my mission is to take Jesus Christ out of the church and to the public. There's a scripture that says, John 10:10 says that the thief comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. That means that's Satan. That is the devil, whatever you want to call it. And he speaks to these people that are what you want to consider mentally ill, and he calls them out to go kill people. He convinces them that they need to do it. Mental illness is not what you want to think it is. Mental illness is about demons. Jesus told his disciples, he said, if you have 2 coats, sell one, get a sword. That was their concealed weapon, a dagger. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus is telling you to go out there and buy a dagger, but what I am telling you is that he gives you the right to carry one. I have that. I have that right, which gives me to God. I don't have to do it. I choose to do it. This is a battle between good and evil, not between us and guns. See, this whole place should be filled with people who have the correct information. See, Jesus can change your life. Do I make sense?
First of all, I agree, Jesus is a badass. Just not in the way you mean, right? See, I read the story of Jesus as a story of nonviolence and the power of nonviolence. That's what I read the story as. So I think someone who sees Jesus as an example of someone who would kick your ass is fundamentally misreading the story. And the real Messiah is not a warrior king. The real Messiah is someone who will lay down his life for others. Because that's what Jesus did. And he did it to the point of death. But even that didn't. That can't kill love. Love is stronger than death. Period. And it was really popular in evangelical movements years back. What would Jesus do, right? Nobody's asking that in that movement, in the NRA. Because if you asked, what would Jesus do? There wouldn't be a wall at the border. immigrant refugees would be welcome, you wouldn't be cutting children's programs from the budget. So that offends me. It offends me for people to get up and use the story of Jesus. It's just so badly misused that I really hate that. I cringe when I hear that.
They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again.
We're actually attending the NRA convention and conducting interviews there. In order to attend the convention, we all had to buy memberships. Do you have any thoughts on the NRA?
Nicole Hockley.
You know, it's funny. I don't actually have anything against the NRA members. I honestly believe that the NRA leadership doesn't necessarily reflect what the members are. You know, I don't choose to demonize gun owners. That's not my choice. But as far as the NRA goes, that leadership is beyond saving.
Matt Bennett.
Yeah, the NRA is the sun around which all the planets of the gun debate rotate. If you watched Dana Lash videos for the NRA, what she's doing is mostly aimed at core NRA radicals. The NRA claims they have 5 million members. Let's just presume that's true. The NRA has 4 magazines. You can sign up for one when you join, and one is called America's First Freedom, which is their radical magazine. But that's your lowest circulation magazine. The big one is American Rifleman, which is about hunting. And then there's one that's about, it's like a gun buyer's guide, but America's First Freedom is about the gun debate and politics. It's like a magazine version of a Dana Lash video. The incredible paradox of the NRA is that they project power and they project powerlessness. And they say on the one hand, we are unbelievably powerful, and if you cross us, we will crush you. And on the other hand, oh my God, someone's gonna come and take all of your guns, and we're powerless to stop them.
Chris Murphy, the U.S. Senator Michael Bloomberg bought for himself 3 years ago, stated, quote, "I think the NRA is telling people to shoot us." Give me a break. And Russia told the NRA to create this ad too. Really, Senator? How dare you? When it was your Bernie Sanders supporter who opened fire on Republican congressmen in Virginia. Now the media uses this concocted controversy to claim gun owners are upset with the NRA.
Senator Murphy, how does it feel to have an F rating from the NRA?
It feels fantastic.
John Cooksey.
If the NRA disappeared, I truly believe that Senator Cruz would not change a thing. The NRA, they give money, but they pale in comparison to a company like Comcast, like a telecommunications company. They give way more money than the NRA, way more. What the NRA has and what they have to threaten with is votes, and those are worth a lot more than money. It has to do with people. The NRA has 5 million members. They're one-issue voters. They vote. They vote hard.
Excuse me, why are you so scared? Because violent crime rates are the lowest in a generation. Violent crime rates are declining. I didn't say I was scared. At what point did I say I was scared?
John Donahue, professor at Stanford and economist that studies the efficacy of gun laws.
So we're actually going to the NRA convention. They're holding it in Dallas this year.
Oh dear. You guys are brave souls.
So do you have any advice on how to have civilized conversations with some of these people without sparking debate?
That's going to be a challenge. I will say this, if you start to question them too strongly on their views, it gets angry pretty quick. Now, the interesting thing, I am reading a wonderful book by one of my Stanford colleagues. His name is Robert Sapolsky, and he wrote a book called Behave. And they've done interesting work where they've asked people about very controversial issues to see if the cognitive side of the brain lights up or the emotional. And for most NRA members, the emotional side of the brain lights up when they talk about the Second Amendment. And And when the emotional side is dominant, the reasoning side is sort of suppressed to some degree. So that's why there's so much lack of consensus, because when an NRA member starts asking questions, they are so emotional that they are not in a position to evaluate data.
What's your name, age, and why are you here?
I'm Joseph. I'm here to support the Second Amendment. That means that what other criminals have, you should have too, because then they're going to beat you in the gunfight.
And why do you feel the need to own guns?
Because criminals have guns too. I mean, Chicago, what's going on over there with the crime over there? I mean, I Googled Chicago shootings. Chicago shootings, what comes up in the Google search? I mean, just last week, 27 people were shot, 4 of them dead, and it's things like this that make Chicago a role model for what it looks like when the gun grabbers get it what they want it their way. And the criminals are not going to obey the laws. They're going to get whatever they want because they got nothing to. No one will look over their shoulder to what they have and what they can use on people.
Hi, I'm doing a documentary-style play on gun violence in America, and I was wondering if I could ask you...
Why not all violence? Or teens texting, which kills double the amount of people than guns, or car accidents, or drunk driving.
What about, okay, you're a bitch.
Do you think gun violence is an issue in America?
It is. It's definitely an issue. It's how we go about solving the problem. That's the problem in the country right now.
So how should we solve it?
Well, there's a lot of people that are saying, we'll just ban these and that'll solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem of the person committing the crime. Prime example, England can't own a gun. And what are they having? Mass stabbings. And what are they doing now? Confiscating knives? And is that going to solve the problem? No. Because, that person is, if I can't have a knife, what am I going to use next? Well, I know, I'll try a pipe. And in some countries, they've resorted to bombing. I mean, look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look inside the cities. They aren't going and shooting up a bunch of people. They're driving a car full of explosives and blowing it up and killing thousands of people.
Can you tell us your thoughts on background checks or the strengthening of those and just gun control laws in general?
I was never in favor of background checks when they first started doing them. I still don't know if I'm in favor of them now. Because they keep letting people slip through the cracks. Like the guy that shut up the Waffle House. The police have confiscated them. Then his daddy gave it back to him, and that's just crazy. But I don't think you ought to have the government deciding who gets to own a gun and who doesn't.
Do you feel in danger being in Dallas right now, or due to what?
Well, I don't feel in danger right now, but I've been attacked before.
You have?
Yeah, the last time all I had to defend myself was my fists.
That attack what prompted you to want to learn more about guns?
Well, I want to learn more about guns so I have another means of protecting myself.
So how do we solve violence or diffuse it?
If somebody's going to perpetrate a crime, they're going to figure out how to do it. If I use an ice pick on you, or I sharpen a kitchen knife and stab you to death, or bludgeon you with a tire iron, if I'm going to do something violent, I'm going to figure out how to do it.
So there's a lot of turmoil right now in the country involving guns especially. So would you say gun violence in particular is an issue in the United States?
When it's in the hands of the wrong person, it can be a very big threat.
And so, if you were to say anything to the people who have lost loved ones to guns, those who are grieving, what would you say?
First of all, I would say I'm sorry for your loss. No one deserves to lose a loved one the way that these people lost their families. Second of all, I would say I'm a real big believer in God, and a real big believer in, you're gonna make me cry, a real big believer in what goes around comes around. And so, that being said, I really feel for the families. It's really very scary. I'm 44, I graduated in '92, and I couldn't imagine someone coming into the school and shooting it up when I was a kid. So I really feel sorry for the kids that have had to go through that. That's gonna stick with them for the rest of their lives, the families, the kids, but I truly believe that the families, they just need to educate themselves and make sure that they're safe and that they can protect themselves, because the people target the people that don't have guns. Have you noticed that? Schools, they know there's no guns. Movie theaters, they know there's no one in the theater with a gun. So they're gonna know you're not gonna come back at them because they're scared of the guns. They wanna shoot you, but they don't wanna be shot at unless they're shooting themselves. So I really think you just have to be able to protect yourself,
It was awesome having an interview.
And I'm sorry, I got ADD. I hope y'all understood all that.
No, it was very clear. Thank you.
Y'all have a good day.
You too.
Y'all are doing good.
there.
My name is Daniel.
So I'm kind of an accidental activist in this area. I grew up with firearms. I certainly have firearms. I would imagine I'm the most well-armed person in this room, to be honest with you.
When I was growing up, I was real close with my sister. I was 15 years old when she had her baby, and I guess being 15 years old and having a little nephew was pretty cool, I guess.
Anyway, he was just an amazing kid. So he got his driver's license, and the very first night he was allowed to go out and drive in the evening, he took some friends to a party. It was a girl's birthday party, and when they were at that party, they noticed that a couple of young men were giving him drinks.
My nephew, bless his heart, was a little skater kid. And, not my scene, but he was a little skater kid, and these boys were giving him dirty looks. And so my nephew and his friends got in the truck and decided to leave. And as they did, my nephew's friends noticed that these two boys were part of a gang. And so he threw out a slur. He said the word morte to him, which apparently we found out later in the trials that's some huge insult to these little gangbangers.
So they got in their vehicle and chased down my nephew's truck. They fired 32 rounds into his truck. My nephew was hit twice, and he flipped his truck. All his friends made it out all right, but my nephew bled out in the sea, at the edge of the farmer's field.
It's rough for me. It's even harder for my sister. That was her only boy. She lives in one of my condos here in Dallas now, and we don't talk about it much. And when Mother's Day comes, I don't say Happy Mother's Day, because it ain't happy.
I don't know where I stand in all this, to be real honest with you. I own 218 firearms. I'm an avid hunter. I'm an avid gun collector. I'm a member of the NRA. I was at the NRA convention.
What I do know is that the firearm that was used to kill my nephew was never found. It was a 9mm, and they just reloaded that thing over and over, just shoving those clips into it.
I don't pretend to have the answers to all of this. Gun violence. Violence through the use of firearms in our society. But you know, we put man on the moon, and we launched missions to Mars. I mean, we built an internet, or Al Gore did at least.
And so this is a problem that can be solved. I believe that it can be solved.
And I don't have all the answers. And some of the answers that y'all propose would adversely affect me. But I believe we can solve this problem somehow.
I have this kind of screwed up, maybe screwed up, need to live with the pain and to take in as much of the pain as I can, because I couldn't be there to save him and he had to deal with it all. I just feel like I kind of owe it to him, and I don't feel like I want to be cured or better or counseled or make it better. I want it to be hard. I want all the pain there is.
And if there was anything you could say to Daniel today, what would it be?
Just tell him how much I miss him. That I loved every minute of our time together, and I don't know what to believe about what's coming, but I hope to see him again.
As you selected your seats this afternoon, you may have noticed a pair of shoes underneath. Would you please collect these shoes and hold them in your hands? Thank you. Each pair represents an individual whose life was lost to gun violence in the last 24 hours. If you could please pass them to the center. Thank you.
15-minute talk back. The question that we usually start people with is when you go to church tomorrow or on your ride home or at dinner tonight, what are you going to talk about and what are you going to take away from this show? So, thank you.
Are you going to record this podcast? It's probably going to be easier maybe for that way.
Okay, so let's get this thing started. So the question that we usually ask people is, what are you going to take away from this show when you go away from it?
Your kids are marvelously talented. Good job.
Thank you.
I think what I'm a high school teacher, and I will say that what I have felt since Parkland is that the hope of this country is with me. And I believe that sincerely. And that is part of what I see in the show.
Did you meet the Parkland students?
No,
We met Manuel Oliver, the parents of Joaquin Oliver, Joaquin Oliver, one of the kids lost him. They came and saw the exhibit, which is the art installation. They couldn't come see the show because of the time. They were on such a time crunch. but we did get to meet them well. And they were very nice, very good people.
I think sometimes it's very difficult to stay hopeful because these things are so prevalent in our culture and in our society. And I think that things like this show how important art is. I think that this is a very influential piece, and I'm coming out of it thinking of these things a lot differently, and I think it just shows how important art is and how important it is that we keep these social issues that are very difficult to talk about and we put them in this light.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
So I know that it was a very long process for all of you, and there was a lot of emotional interviews and dealings with certain subjects. How did you go home and process this each night, knowing that day in and day out and day in and day out, you had to constantly reflect and go on it?
There was actually a moment when Lisa Cody, she's our acting coach for the show, and we're all doing exercises, and like during it, a lot of us actually just broke down and started crying. Because one thing we had found is that all of us were actually protecting ourselves from the material. And so previously we hadn't been fully feeling the words we were saying, just because, I mean, there's so much tragedy within the show. And, you know, being with this, like some of us have for, like I've been working on this for about 6-7 months now, it's just, you have to kind of turn yourself off of it sometimes. And, you know, I go home and I try my best to think about something else. Like, I don't watch dramas anymore. I only watch comedies because I can't.
Just take a couple hours.
Right.
And I joined this show like later. I didn't go to any of the interviews personally. And even listening to the interview and doing the character work for Mark Barden was just like so like painful. And I know that all these characters have such tragic stories, and I could not even imagine being in a room with Mark and with Nicole, because I couldn't take it. I couldn't even take the audio, and so it was
I think that the shoes were very effective. From as soon as we walked in, I knew what it meant. That's one thing. Another thing I wish had been mentioned somehow. I feel like in Las Vegas, 50 people and 400 were injured. 50 people were shot dead by a guy from a window with an AR-15 or whatever he had. So that is such a huge thing in mass shootings that anybody with a gun in that crowd couldn't have done anything anyway. So those people, I feel like they're just already lost to history, like the Pulse nightclub. They just all run together.
Well, you know, even outside of mass shootings, like we see those numbers a lot and we see those stories on the news, but I think if you add them all together, all the other deaths that happen in the inner city that happen because of domestic violence issues, you know, those all add up to this staggering amount, and we don't hear those stories all the time like we see these mass shootings blasted on the news.
And we didn't choose these specific events because one is greater than the other. We kind of just, Mara and Allison, who composed, we had over like 100 hours of audio from.
What I was also going to say, when word got out that we were doing this, we were actually in Sandy Hook, and I got a call from a parent whose daughter died in Pulse nightclub. I talked with parents who lost their daughter in Aurora, and I talked with someone from Las Vegas. There was a lot of conversations that happened before we ever got to the interview process, and some people eventually decided they didn't want to be interviewed. We were going to make a trip to Sutherland Springs, but after having been to Sandy Hook, you know, at a certain point we needed to touch on other aspects of gun violence. What in my fantasy world, we would have been able to collect all these stories and make the audios available online, but there was just too much. I mean, it was like too much. But I did speak with people from other mass shootings.
How was the actual script put together?
So the process of putting the script together started probably, like there's the whole process, and then probably about, I want to say 5 or 6 months of that was collecting the audio interviews. They were sent off to transcribers who wrote them all out for us. Mara and Allison picked different sections of different interviews and kind of molded them together into like.
Well, I want to weigh in first.
Yeah.
So after every interview, we did a debriefing. And Allison and I took what that debriefing was and what the students said were important to them. So we didn't just randomly pick things to put in the script. So we went back through all of those audios. We didn't have all the transcripts. We took everything that they said, and then we tried to sit down. And our first draft was like a 6-hour show. And then we walked in on the first day, and it was a 4-hour show. And over about a week and a half, maybe, I don't know, I don't even remember how much time it took to get it down to a 2-hour, 2.5-hour show. But yes.
Is that why we debriefed?
Yes.
No, I thought we debriefed so we can like kind of reflect and like.
It was all of those things. I mean, it was an opportunity, to listen to heavy material and have an opportunity to talk about it. And some of those debriefings ended up being parts of the show as well when they were reflecting. But it was also so that we could synthesize what was relevant to you guys, because we knew. So they went back to school. Our last interviews were at the NRA convention, and we had 1 month to put a script together. And so we knew, and we were working round the clock to do that. And we knew we didn't have access to them because some of them were graduating and like trying to finish up school. So so we were trying to get that from you along the way without explicitly saying what piece should be in the show.
And then even still, after that fact, there was a lot of, oh, I wish this had been included, I wish this had been included. So it was definitely a long process.
I mean, there's so much within this issue. Like, gun violence branches out into so many different subcategories that you could honestly make like 50 shows out of all the audio that we collected. So it's so hard. Yeah, it's so hard to pick and choose.
We had such a hard time in the interview staying on topic, because when you start talking about guns and gun rights and gun violence, there's no way that it just stays on that. It's such a part of every part of politics.
Somebody over here had a question?
Yes. I had heard that you were asked to leave the NRA convention. Is that
A couple of us were.
Beeson.
Beeson and Sheldrick, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we were at the NRA convention. We were conducting interviews. It was just me.
Well, let's set it up. Let's set it up. So we've been there for 3 days. There was a ladies' brunch. So I and all of the ladies were at the ladies' brunch. The 3 guys in the cast, Fabian's not with us. He actually got a full ride to Skidmore College and is off at college right now. So they were sort of on their own with our videographer. So
we were just going around asking questions, doing interviews, and we were interviewing this one guy, and we were very close to this gun booth. I'm not sure what it was. So the guy, I guess the owner of the booth.
It wasn't even his booth. It wasn't his booth.
But somebody, he saw us interviewing, so he came to see what we were talking about, and he was just listening in. And when he heard the words mass shooting, it kind of struck a chord with him. And he intervened and told us to not record, and he got security.
And police.
He wasn't even the guy being interviewed. The guy being interviewed was fully.
And we could have gone back in. So at the time, I'm getting text messages. We're in the ladies' brunch. We were escorted out, and so we have to make it. It's a huge convention center. We're trying to well, where are you? Don't leave yet, right? And so once we sort of all convened, somebody else had come to you guys and said, well, you can go back in, but you can't record anything. But there's nothing. We're NRA members. There's nothing in our membership that says we can't do that. And so then I show up, and then security found us, and so we could have gone back in, but they made it clear that they were watching us now. And it was the 3rd day, we had a lot of interviews, and it was just.
And so you never went back to John Gordon after he said one thing, and then he said another thing at the end.
Well, John Cornyn spoke the first day. Of the NRA. Yes.
Yeah.
So
we didn't interview him. We saw him on stage.
Oh, you didn't really go to.
We met in DC.
And he said one thing.
Yeah, he's very nice, and then 2 months later we saw him at the convention. Yeah. Different person.
Yeah.
Over here.
I've never been as encouraged about what we can do in November as I am right now, because we have the confluence of three important movements. We have the Me Too movement for women's rights. We've got the gun violence issue going on. We've got the separation of children from their families down at the border. We've got a lot of angry people in the faith community, and the elected officials listen to the faith community because that's numbers, that's votes. And so, to the extent that you can take this art and this beauty and get it out to the polls so that you can actually make people who are up for election in November feel threatened by what you know and what you think, that's where the rubber meets the road on all this. This is really important. So we've got 4 months till November. So everybody that knows anybody that can register to vote, get out there. That's my
I feel like
it's just fantastic.
I feel like Emma Gonzalez is really pushing that us teens can have a voice, and even though it'd be like really great if we could do stuff, like she's definitely like helping our generation out by going around and spending her time making speeches and all these things. So
I think education is just a really important aspect of it, and also, like you said, registering to vote. Like, I know kids who are old enough to, and they just don't because they don't, either they don't know how, or somebody didn't give them the resources, or they just didn't feel like it. And I feel like it's so important to just, I feel like a lot of people think that their one vote doesn't matter, so that why you try. But I think it's really important to like encourage, especially young voters, that, you know, every vote very much counts. Yeah.
I can't tell you how important it is. We had one city official just not even wanting to talk about one particular issue. It took one minister to go on his Facebook page to say, why won't the city talk to me about this? We had a meeting the next day, and then they passed a resolution to fix it. So you can make a difference. If you feel powerless, you are not.
Over there.
So first of all, I think you're marvelous. This is the second time I've seen the show, and I so want it somehow to be encapsulated so that this can go around for other people to see. It is really powerful. You present so many different aspects and voices of the issue. And the night after the opening night, I was at the Road to Change. And so what those kids keep emphasizing is both the voter registration and it is education. And I think the message from this play, from you, and from the students is we cannot afford to be complacent. We cannot, just like you're saying, we cannot afford to think that my voice and my vote don't matter. The most dangerous thing I think that can happen to any of us and all of us is to feel like it's too big for us. And to me, what you have done for me personally and everyone I could talk to about it since, and will continue to talk about it, is you're empowering me about the importance of the message. And I hope everyone in this room feels the same way. So I thank you, I thank you, I thank you.
We have time for one more question, so you, sir.
So a thought first, it reminds me the way your experience of processing and having to chill reminds me of actually what I've seen of TV programs where the doctors are working in an ER. You know, I can't even imagine the kind of trauma that they process every day and how they disconnect and when they're able to. The other is, how do you get your story outside of Dallas? Is this play?
So a lot of people have been asking that. So the question has been asked, could we tour it? But half the cast is just graduated and is headed off to school. I was contacted this week by a publisher. Like, you never get contacted by a publisher ever. So somebody, there's been enough press that a publisher contacted about the script. So I think that that's a realistic thing that could happen, is that I could work with a publisher and we could get the script published, and then other, places could do it. I think that's probably the most realistic. To do a tour, I would have to recast half of the cast, and a tour usually takes a year to plan.
Right.
It's not something that you can, throw together.
So I think that I think the short answer, and also Manuel and Patricia Oliver, when they saw the exhibit, they actually talked about the exhibit coming to Parkland. And I've talked with several people over the last few days about the logistics of that. All of these shoes are supposed to be donated here in Dallas to nonprofits. Like, they're coming tomorrow to pick up all of these shoes. Also, logistically, hanging them, I don't know what kind of facilities exist in Parkland, Florida that would that we could do this in. So I think that I'm going to try and work with them. I mean, we have the chandeliers, we have the audio-visual piece all done, that if they wanted to do a shoe drive in Parkland and around Florida, that those shoes could be reconfigured in some way. They may not be hung around the room. We could reconfigure what that would look like, but the same audio, casket, all of that would be in the space. So that's a possibility in the next few months. Yes.
So I talked to Manuel at an event that
Yeah.
night, and he said that he talked to you, and by then his idea was to have the exhibit be traveling and be installations in museums across the country. So it just keeps growing, and God willing, it will keep growing, and you will have this all over the country.
I think that's it.
What you've done is so tremendously powerful that I hope that it does go into some national forum, even the video of it, being shown in other places. You did an incredible job, and the message is so powerful that that this is urgent and we have to work together to fix it now. And I just want to say to you, as somebody who's involved in other issues and working for social change, that change can take a really long time, but it takes people like you who care to not give up and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And even if the changes are small and they take years and years and years, it will happen if you don't give up. So that's my message back to you is what you've done is tremendously powerful, but don't give up. Keep after it.
Thank you. We're really, a lot of this attention is all because of KURA, so we are very, very grateful.
We're working right now on
I know. I'm very, very excited about that. Yes.